And welcome everybody to the first edition of our first episode of the Property Manager Broker Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Brad Larsen, and I have with me Phil Mazur, and we're going to talk to you about a lot of different things associated with selling a property management company. And so Phil and I have been working together on a project where we're becoming industry experts in a niche market of helping buyers and sellers come together to buy property management businesses, to sell property management businesses. There's a distinct need. And so Phil is on the line with me. We're going to be talking a little bit with him in a minute, but to kind of give you an introduction of who I am, as this is our first episode of the podcast, I want to talk to you about kind of who we are as a group and then how this is going to fit in. So I'm myself, Brad Larsen. I'm a property management company owner. I am the founder and broker of RentWorks in San Antonio. We currently manage roughly 900 single family homes. Our revenue is $3+ million a year. Our net operating income is a solid 20-25%. And I'm also the podcast host for the Property Manager Mastermind, which means I've interviewed hundreds of different guests on these many episodes and learned quite a bit about the property management industry, in addition to my speaking engagement that I've been able to work with in NARPM, National Association of Residential Property Managers, which I'd recommend all of you be a part of if you're not already. And one of the things I want to bring out in that is I was fortunate enough to be the chair of the NARPM accounting standards. So I created an idea that all of the property management companies out there should get onto the same accounting standards. And the reason I know is because I've suffered in a lot of different ways from bad accounting. And a lot of operators are potentially good at sales, they're potentially good at managing homes, but like me, I'm very weak at accounting. And I really, truly wish we had a standard out there. And so I went to the National Association of Residential Property Managers, went to NARPM and said, hey, let's create this NARPM accounting standard. They created a budget, we hired a vendor, and then we created the NARPM accounting standard. So it's legit and out there and all NARPM members can get this. And I was the person that helped push that through. I think it's important to understand that I really identified the need and want for this a long time ago. And that's going to play very, very well into brokering and or buying or selling property management businesses themselves. I'm also a NARPM certified instructor, so I do go out and teach property management. I also started the Property Management Mastermind Facebook group, the Property Management Mastermind Conference, and that has been very successful. We had our first iteration in 2020, and I also recently started the Managers Roundtable, which is an opportunity to create a system to where we create small groups of 8 to 9 folks, and they mastermind for 6 months, 2 sessions a month. And so that's a paid service through the Property Manager Mastermind, and we broker those groups and put them together and oversee them. So it's filling that need. Everybody wants that mastermind group, but it's very difficult to do. And so we filled that need. All right, I've talked a lot about myself. I just want to give you a quick intro to me on this. So what I want to do is I want to tell you about Phil Mazur with my experience with Phil, and then I'm going to turn it to him and shut up. I know you can't believe I'm going to shut up for 5 minutes, right? But my experience with Phil. So in 2008, I went to Phil Mazur, who was starting to get on into his own to become a virtual CFO, virtual chief financial officer. We had just suffered a large embezzlement at RentWorks. We had just discovered it in 2018. The details are a whole nother story, but Phil was able to come in and redevelop, redesign, re-implement all of our accounting procedures. And it started from the very top down to the bottom. And he was able to do that for us. And we've been using him as a virtual CFO for however long it is, year and a half, almost 2 years. And he came in and implemented EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System, into RentWorks. He helped implement that. He's a certified implementer. And so those are the couple things that he did for RentWorks, is he bailed us out of a very messy jam of our accounting, cleaned us up, got us into some great processes, worked with our CPA that's local here in San Antonio and helped get us on the right track. And he helped implement EOS into our business at RentWorks. So he's done a lot of good things for my company. And I have, also been able to do a few things in the industry. And so this is just kind of giving us a place in the world to create this property manager broker concept. And so without further ado, bragging him up, I'm going to introduce Phil Mazur. Phil, take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. So my background actually did not start in property management, surprisingly, but I went to school for finance and accounting, and that's kind of where I learned. And I worked at a Fortune 500 company for 13 years. And so I just really grew my accounting and financial skills from a very sophisticated organization, that was just focused on accounting. I mean, we had 350 people just in the accounting department. So, but I learned a ton, and eventually I really didn't enjoy that from a, bigger picture perspective. I always had a little bit of entrepreneurial vision in me that I wanted to do something bigger for myself. And I wasn't quite ready to take a big leap, like starting my own business. But I eventually took a few different jobs that got me into smaller companies. And getting into smaller companies really exposed me to more than the accounting and finance stuff, to like truly how do you run a business? Like dealing with people, really, what does it look like in an accounting organization when you're not managing in a department, when you literally have to pay the bills one day and talk to a banker the next day? And that kind of stuff really opened my eyes and really developed me a lot further. Eventually, as I went through a few job transitions, I came upon GK Houses in Birmingham and met Matthew Whitaker. And I was just kind of blown away by a small company that had a big vision and big aspirations and goals. So, long story short, I ended up taking a position with GK as a director of finance. And this was about 6 or 7 years ago. And I didn't even know it at the time, but they were implementing EOS, which I came to learn a lot about. But it was EOS that led them to say, hey, if you want to get to where you guys want to go, which was a huge growth plan, you needed to hire some people. So that's just one example of somebody looking forward and realizing that you need to make a decision to hire somebody when you might not be ready. And I bring that up because it really benefited me personally, because I got a chance to go work in this organization. And I learned property management from the inside. So I got in there and it was like, okay, Phil, you're coming in here to give us a perspective on numbers and data that we've never had before, because we feel like we need to get more sophisticated. So what Brad's describing of what I did at Rentworks, well, I did that at GK, but it took me a lot longer because I was just learning how to do it. I was learning property management at the same time. I mean, working in a small business, it was like, I got to close the books, I got to pay the bills, but everybody just went to lunch and I'm the only one here. So I also got to answer the doorbell when the angry tenant comes in. So I got to do all that stuff. Now I hated it. I mean, I literally hated it, but I learned to hate the things that everybody hates in the industry. And really spending 3.5 years there just gave me this huge perspective of some gaps that are needed to be filled in the industry. I went to NARPM meetings. I met, I listened to speakers like Brad for the first time and other folks, and just seeing these problems when 700 property managers are in a room, all lacking something that I felt I personally had. And so all that kind of planted this kind of something inside me to go out on my own and start my business, which is the CFO mission. And really what that has allowed me to do is really recreate what I did at GK in terms of setting up accounting processes and systems and good financial reporting to actually use data to help you run your business. And so, I also got to be a startup just and experience what it's like to own your business. Like a lot of folks that are going to be listening to this podcast have done or are in the process of doing every day. And I know what those pains are like. And it's eerily similar. A lot of the experiences that I go through myself, they happen within property management as well. There's a lot of things that happen in businesses that are the same among industries based on size, number of people. I mean, we all have the same problems. We want to focus on this little niche in property management. So that's where the past 2 years of the CFO mission has been. I work very intimately with people like Brad and owners of companies to really just kind of come into the company. We put a vision out there. We figure out what we want to do. So we use EOS principles, and then we figure out where the gaps are, like in the data. How do we get data working for us instead of against us? And it's fun because we take these small organizations that thought they couldn't have a certain level of expertise or sophistication, and we give it to them. And next thing you know, we're operating with vision. We're operating with financial data. And once that's in place, then we can really move the company forward. So I've been involved with 30 plus companies to some degree over the last 5 to 6 years. When I was at GK, we did a bunch of acquisitions. That's going to be huge for this brokerage because I saw some acquisitions not work. I saw some acquisitions go all the way to the finish line and get closed. And I know what it's like to do the first one and have no clue what you're doing. And I think that's huge. And when Brad and I started talking about this, it's like most of the people that are going to do this, I mean, you're only going to sell your business once. You got to do it right. Don't try to do it by yourself. And that's why we feel like there's a need to help some folks really do that. And I feel like what's happening in the industry, for the most part, we can't stop. We can't stop these macroeconomic factors from happening. Consolidation will happen. So let's try to help it along and do it in a positive way, and make sure people are doing things that they're comfortable with doing and that they're fully educated.
Phil, make sure you iterate some of your better acumen as far as accounting. And because I want you to really explain to folks that, okay, you've been doing these things for a long time. You've been acting as a CFO level. I mean, really talk to us about that because, I love the stuff you mentioned with the acquisition. That's great stuff. I really want you to hear about more of your resume, as it would, on some of the accounting standards.
Awesome. So my degree is actually in finance. And when I went to work for US Steel, based out of Pittsburgh, where I'm from, and they put you in roles that are accounting / finance. And a lot of that's not going to make sense to a lot of people because they kind of group it together. But what I got to do is see processes. So we were so big, like I was in charge of the AP process, payables. I was in charge of billing, invoicing, getting money in. I was in charge of inventory at one point. These are all roles that I held. Eventually, I got into what we labeled financial analyst role. That was really what I loved because it was me being the right-hand man to an operator. So I would be in charge of a line of the steel company, right? So they'd have a general manager and then me. So I was kind of acting as a CFO on this micro level, right? Now, to put it in perspective, I mean, at one point I held this role and our annual spend was $1 billion. So, I mean, it's like, okay, but I didn't deal with the cash, for example, like that's because we had somebody else for the cash, right? But it was the analytics. It was the day-to-day operation. How do we make money like for real in this business? Stuff comes in, the stuff goes out, and we need to make sure we got a profit. So learning about all the details. On an accounting side, there's a huge back end to that. You're talking about general ledger codes, balance sheets, income statements, all that stuff. I know as a owner of a small business, that is like Chinese language to folks, right? So fast forward to me working in small businesses, I've recognized like, okay, that expertise has to be there, but I also have to be able to articulate that to people like you, Brad, owners of companies. So we need to put controls in place. Like I need to make you feel comfortable that this is why we do it. Don't worry necessarily about the details, but I need to show you what a control is, meaning how do you make sure that you're not getting money stolen from you? How do you know that your income statement is accurate? Like I make sure that all these boxes are being checked so that you can there's integrity to your data. So as far as resume goes, I mean, I got an MBA from Penn State eventually. That was more of the business management side. I will tell you, property management accounting, it's easy. Like it's easy for me, right? Because when I worked at US Steel, it was like literally like the chemical breakdown of making steel. Like there's 100 different kinds of chemistries involved and mix and match. And what are the costs? Like that was like blow your mind accounting stuff. Like it was ridiculously hard. So this is nothing to me personally, but the process of setting it up, that's tough. The NORPM accounting standards are huge.
I want you to reiterate that too, because, I was one of the persons that helped create the NARPM accounting standards along with the committee that I chaired, but you are also the guy that implemented it. You implemented it into RentWorks. And so you're very intimately understood, let's say, about what the NARPM accounting standards are, and you help implement those into businesses. And here's one of the big reasons I want to talk about this too, is we created the NARPM accounting standards in the essence to standardize everything. Okay, it's really easy, but What's going to help here in the actual context of buying and or selling a property management company is for the operators that are on the NARPM accounting standards. It is a very easy insight and quick insight to see what their books look like. Before, it would be a jumble of data that would go from the operator to an acquirer, and we're talking weeks of analysis, a lot of effort, and a lot of missed things, a lot of missed potential glory that the seller may miss out on. Now that we have a NARPM accounting standards, for those operators that get onto that, they can quickly be looked at by an acquirer, and an acquirer can potentially make an offer to purchase within darn near minutes, certainly hours, versus weeks before. And that's one of the big reasons, in addition to not only being able to compare, now operators can compare one another. Hey, on this line item in the NARPM accounting standards, we're X, and you guys are X plus 400. We don't understand how you made such gains in that realm. What are you doing? That's where the rubber meets the road. Now, Phil, I want you to talk a little bit more about that, like all that whole implementation stuff, so people understand more of your expertise there.
Yeah. When Brad and I first were getting to know each other a few years back, we were talking about the NARPM accounting standards when it was in development, and we both knew and agreed that, like, immediately this thing wasn't going to have a huge impact because people weren't going to be on it yet, right? But here we are almost 2 years later, and we're having conversations like this. I want people to understand that you have to put this thing in place and use it. It's not just like, I'm going to go sell my business and then I'm going to get on the NARPM accounting standards. Like, hold up. You don't know what you don't know about your business. You need a method for getting there. You can use whatever chart of accounts is in QuickBooks right now, but why try to decipher something whenever you've already got this other system that's been created for you? So if you ever want to go out and compare yourself to somebody else, you can always do it, but it's going to take you so much longer to do it on this other, we'll call it standard, but it's not really a standard. It's just something different. So when I bring people on, automatically, like, it's a requirement, NARPM accounting standards. Like, I will not work with you, right, if you don't do this. And it's not because I'm like, oh, every single code in this is perfect and blah. It's not. I mean, anybody can pick that apart, but it does the job. And really, we need to get you the right perspective on your data, and it allows you to do that. So I can go and look at a new company. I want to be able to, if you want me to look at your company, I'm going to go into your QuickBooks. I should be able to learn something without you telling me anything. Like, I can look at your data. And typically what I see is there's a whole bunch of mess going on, and there's disorganization and all, now keep in mind, people call me because they know they have problems. But, if I go into a company that's on the NARPM accounting standards, I should expect something completely different. I should expect to learn from day one how well they're doing, their month-to-month expenses, their profit, their P&L, trends that happen, what percentage of money they spend in people versus systems versus, what they're doing in maintenance. Are they making profit? Like, so many things that you can tell just by putting in a good accounting system. Okay. So I just encourage anybody that's not on it to start thinking about it, because it doesn't matter if you want to sell your business. Do you want to manage your business well? Use the standard. That's what it's for.
Clarify something on that too. I mean, people think that I want to make sure people understand that NARPM accounting standards is it's like a chart of accounts, and it's some basic guidelines, and it's some protection measures, but it's not going to tell you exactly how to pay a bill, for example, or how to collect rent, for example. If you collect a rent check at your front desk, there's a process for that. The rent check comes in, it is receipted out. The front desk person brings that to your accounting person. The accounting person scans it, applies it to the home inside the software. That's all of a process, okay? But the bottom line at the end is when that management fee is credited to the business, that's where it goes into a line item in your QuickBooks as revenue to the business. And so the process of getting that money into your operational account to be able to send that to your owner, that's a whole nother method, because now you're dealing with people, not just numbers. And Phil's an expert at that, because he came in and helped us do all of these things from the process point of view and labeling and putting it into the NARPM accounting standard. So Phil, I want to stop there, otherwise we'll keep beating that to death. What we want to do is I think we want to talk about why we're doing this. Okay, why did we decide to partner up and start working with companies in a buying or selling fashion, because our focus is going to be helping businesses sell and are helping buyers buy. So we want to act as the intermediaries, the brokers, the deal flow personnel that's actually going to create a situation where there's a win-win for everybody. And so I'll kick it off, and I'll tell you, I think there's an absolute need for this, because there's regular business brokers out there. And if a management company decides they want to sell, they can go hire a business broker off the street. There's franchises out there. There's 100 of those. The regulations for doing business brokerage are very small, very gray. And so they can go hire a broker, and then they can try to explain every single thing about their business to that broker. Okay, and then the broker is going to misinterpret that and try to translate that in some sort of marketing effort to a potential acquirer. And I can tell you without a shadow of doubt, they're going to screw it up. They might tell you they understand the business, but they really don't. Phil and I understand the business intimately from the inside out. I own a management company. Phil has helped work with management companies and helped do acquisitions before, in mergers and acquisitions for another company. So he understands the why. And the other big part of that, I'm going to turn it over to Phil for some of his comments, but I also think that the buyers might be slightly or at least underrepresented in a lot of these transactions. A buyer could raise their hand and say, I want to sell. They could have 100 units, 10,000 units, however many units they have. And they may really not know the flow of the transaction, and they might be leaving chips on the table. They might be getting shorted. They might not have the opportunity to go in front of 2 or 3 acquirers to get the best and highest bid. So there's an opportunity there that we feel we can create a max value opportunity for the sellers, in addition to the buyers wanting the deal flow. So Phil, any comments on just some of those things I talked about?
Yeah, I do. I think that there is a little bit of a uneducation in terms of the brokerage market. I've seen valuations being done. So, and this comes from, you need to get money to buy these, companies. So not everybody has millions of dollars in cash. So typically a bank's going to be involved, and there's a process to that. And I've got to go through the frustrations of that process. When you talk to somebody from an SBA or just any bank, you have to do this education. This is my business. This is property management. This is how we make money. You have to do this over and over and over and over. You might have to do it 5 times for one company you're trying to buy. There's just not enough sophistication about the property management industry when it comes to banking. And why? Because they don't care about the little company. If somebody's a business broker, they want to do $1 million deals. I'm talking 10 million, 50 million, $100 million deals. That's how they get paid big money. So if you've got this random broker out there, he's not going to be interested in your company that might sell for 500,000 or even $1 million or 2 million. It's not a big deal to them. Well, it's a big deal to us.
The random business broker, to talk about that, is they just want it to sell. They don't really care. They just want to sell it and move on. They're just like, any other potential real estate transaction. They want to sell the home. They want to move on. They want to sell the business. They want to move on. So if they can get an acceptable bid to them and get that pushed through, they're fine with it. And the chances of you getting repeat business are nil. Here's one thing I want to make sure that everybody understands about this, why we decided to create this, is take this to heart. Every single property management company operator out there is going to want to buy or sell at some point. Every single one of them. You cannot tell me an instance to where any property management entrepreneur would not want to buy their competitor or buy a small person going out of business. Or at some point you flip that around, at some point they're going to want to exit. They want to cash out. They want to retire. So at every point at some time, every one of these property management company business owners is going to want to go in either one of these directions. Now, when we create this process, we're going to come into a business, we're going to work with them, try to package them, improve them. And then when we introduce it to the sales side, we introduce it to the market, we have buyers by first name that are interested in deal flow. They want to buy management companies. If you don't believe us, put out your own Facebook post sometime and say, hey, I want to sell my management company, and watch how many people respond to you. I mean, they're a very hot item, Now, I would caution you from doing that because what's going to happen is if you don't know your numbers inside and out, you might not be getting as much as you could. This is where you want to engage a business broker like us to ensure that we can get you max dollar for the business that you built and you want to sell and make a successful exit at. So having said all that, that is the why behind why we're doing this. We've put this idea out in front of a bunch of different people in one-on-one conversations. Every single scenario, whether they're looking to buy and or sell, their operators looking to sell eventually, or buyers wanting to buy, they've all been excited about this. They all realize that this is going to make things go more smooth for everybody involved, to have somebody in the middle, making sure the numbers look right, make sure they're packaged correctly, and to make sure that all things are done correctly on the process of selling. There is a flow to this, and we understand that. So let's talk about the service real quick, Phil. People are going to ask, okay, great, we get the why, we understand that. Well, how does it work? What do you do? What is the service? And so we could spend a lot of time talking about it, but we're just going to kind of break this down just a few different points. And it's really the first thing I want to hone in on is it's going to depend on the client that we're working with, the operator themselves. If we're working for a seller who comes to us and says, hey, I want to sell my property management business, well, the first thing that Phil's going to have to do is assess them. We'll have a conversation with them. We'll look at their numbers. We're going to assess them as a business, and that turns into a consultation. We may have to come in and do 1, 2, 3, 10 things for you before you're even ready to sell, which could take 1 day or 1 year. It really depends on the business itself. So the it depends model, which everybody knows I hate, the it depends business model of working with someone in the very beginning is absolutely true here. There's no way to get around that. We need to personalize the service as we go in and look at a business to assess them and see where we go from there. So let's talk about that, Phil. Let's imagine somebody comes to us. What are some of the things that you would do just to get a handle on who they are, what they are?
There's some very basic things, obviously, number of houses, amount of annual revenue that you're generating. We also want to really assess where your mind is in terms of what you perceive as the value of your company. Because I think that's one thing that we're going to be able to do for this industry is get rid of these misconceptions. I think there's two sides that are really off. One is some people think their company's worth a lot more than it is. And we can help people understand that. And then there's I think this external undervaluation of our industry. So I've seen this through banking appraisals and things like that, where people are looking at things like, you'll hear terms like EBITDA or seller's discretionary earnings. And a lot of times these calculations of value will literally say your company is worth nothing, when we know that's really not the case. So there's an education level there. But yeah, there's a preparation where, we also look at your commitment too, because we're going to say some things that are like, if there's 1, 2, or 3 things we feel like you need to do to get ready, we'll give you the opportunity to do that. We'll help you if we can, if it's something that's under my expertise. And if not, if it's something else, we'll point you in another direction. Brad has tons of contacts. You might want to be at a certain point before you want to sell. So you might be ready right now. That's
another good point. We might get the folks that come to us and say, we want to sell a year from now or 2 years from now. We want to engage with you guys to, one, we want to do revenue maximization. We want to clean up our books, get ourselves in NARPM accounting standards, and put ourselves in a position to where we can go to the market in 2 years from now, for example, 24 months, and we're going to get max value for our company. And we can definitely 100% help them. And I tell you what, on the acquirer side, the buyers that are working with us to get in front of those types of sellers, they absolutely love that. They want to buy a well-performing asset. They want to buy an asset they can quickly implement into their systems and make that thing churn out the cash that will help pay for itself. So this is a win-win for everybody involved. We feel that this is going to increase the standardization multiples across the industry, because we feel that we can justify with comparable sales that certain things should be worth a little bit more than what an SBA valuation might come back at, or even, some of the perceptions that you've heard before of, oh, you're going to get X revenue, X times revenue, or you're going to get X times net operating income, or EBITDA, anything that Phil might have quoted there before. But that's where we build on both sides of it. Now, as we start to package a potential seller, this is where we work through negotiations with a potential buyer. That's where I get involved, Phil's involved. We help work through these negotiations. And just like when you do any sort of big deal, whether it's buying a home or anything like this, having a go-between, an intermediary, really helps smooth the transition, because this is a very emotional event for a seller. I mean, you have to understand this. We understand that because we're in that position. We've been there before. We understand that the company that they're selling is the operator's baby. It is their absolute brainchild. They grew it from scratch potentially. They took it over from one of their parents. So it's a major deal. We understand that. And we know how to treat that. And so we will help you package that and work through the negotiations with an acquirer and eventually get to closing. That's the end result. So we also start with one of the ideas of, okay, Mr. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, where is the end state for you? You know, where do you want to be? Do you want to be on a golf course a year from now? Do you want to be on a sailboat a year from now, 2 years from now? Where do you want to be? And we help work that through and get that in front of a potential acquirer and make that deal flow. Now we can get it all the way through closing. The documentation is just, you know, it's a formality, but the end result of that is just the good negotiations and the good packaging up front. It's just an end result of an attorney drafting up a buy-sell agreement. Everybody signs and away we go. Win, win, win for all parties involved. And I know I'm simplifying it, but you know, there's got to be, you know, it's not a concrete, this is step 1 through 25. It really falls into the it depends model. And I believe Phil and I have a deep understanding of how that works with everybody's psychological standing in addition to their numbers. So Phil, any other comments on that?
Yeah, I think there's a point that you made about emotion that I think is extremely important. And I've experienced this. I think we're going to, you know, whether you want to call us a mediator, intermediary, whatever. I mean, we want to be working to help both parties here. I've seen negotiations where somebody got offended and it killed the deal. I mean, that experience is going to help us to say, okay, at some point, the two parties are probably going to meet, right? But it's important to understand when that should happen. And sometimes it's too soon. And it's also important for each side to understand what the real objectives are, like Brad said. I mean, I've seen people hang their hats on things that once we really dug into what really mattered, those things didn't matter. And I'm not saying that everything is about money. I don't believe that it is. But a lot of things can be turned into money at the end of the day, meaning if you want something for your employees, as an example, that's a touchy subject, right? I want to keep my employee on. I want to make sure they're taken care of, things like that. That's a very common thing that we're going to encounter here. So we're going to help walk you through those type of things from a buyer and a seller. You know,
yeah, it's also important to help people understand that we're going to implement all of the protection methods, the non-disclosure agreements, all of the legal documents that are needed to ensure that we mask and or hide the seller's identity until the absolute necessary time going forward, possibly under a letter of intent. Because we don't want that information to get out, nor we understand how sensitive that information is. We really do. Because if a seller decides to raise their hand and say, I want to sell, that is top secret. You know, that is going to the grave, because you don't want that to get out to the employees. You don't want that to get out to the customers, tenants, owners, vendors. You don't want that to get out at all. But all that can be done very quietly, secretly behind the scenes. And so can a potential masking of that company and white labeling it and putting it in front of an acquirer for a potential discussion without too much information being given. So if a seller wants to remain anonymous, this is the way to do it. Otherwise, you know, it's one of those things that could be where information leaks out, that things go a little weird, and there's not that protection method there. That's what we bring to the table in addition to all the expertise, is the ability to keep those buyers anonymous, keep those sellers anonymous until the very time comes that everybody's ready to come together. So any parting comments at this point, Phil?
Yeah.
Because I think we've talked a lot about what we do and how it works. Let's go ahead and wrap this up.
Yeah, I mean, I would just expanding on plus how do you market it, right? If you want to stay anonymous. And also I think buyers are concerned about their perception too, in terms of how they're perceived as a positive or negative, because there's thousands of property managers out there. We're going to help buyers too, because that marketing is difficult to say, hey, I want to come buy you. That can be an intimidating thing that a lot of people can even get offended by. And really, I know neither party wants to really be perceived like that. This is, I believe, all for the greater good, and we're going to make sure that happens throughout our process.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we do is we also keep the offensive comments or the offensive matters, we keep that out of the game. I mean, it can really ruin something. Just if a buyer comes up and says, "Hey, I want to sell my business," and then let me start over. If a seller comes out and says, "I want to sell my business," and a buyer comes along and says, "Great, I'll give you 50 cents for it." Well, that's offensive, right? And so now the buyer shuts down, the seller's shut out, and the deal's dead from the very beginning. And so we help kind of keep those mediated, if you would, to ensure that things are presented in a good light, a positive light, a fair light, and everybody gets the best value for what they're looking to do. So having said all that,
just one real quick, it's really going to save a ton of time for people, particularly the buyers, because how much you have to invest in that relationship. So essentially, we want to be able to match up a buyer with a relationship that's really already been established, right? Because we are going to have those conversations with the sellers on the front end. They're going to be at a certain level before a buyer even needs to get introduced to them. So they won't have to worry about, am I going to offend this person? They're going to know our perspectives are generally in the right frame of mind where we're probably going to be able to get a deal done if we can make everything work.
Every single acquirer that you and I have talked to in creating this concept has absolutely loved this idea. They absolutely love it because they want the sellers to come out and they want the opportunity for deals. And so we'll work with the seller, we'll get them ready for market, introduce them to market, protect their identity, and the buyers are absolutely loving this concept. So it's going to be a win-win and a fabulous deal for everybody. So without further ado, I want to end this episode, and then we're going to get into the next three in the next few weeks. And so keep in mind, check us out at propertymanagerbroker.com. Any parting comments for the team here, Phil?
I'm good. I'm excited to get started and get in on this podcast to talk about more of the nitty-gritty details.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, Phil, and we'll be talking more. We'll talk to you soon.